He had been looking for answers his whole life, but when he found his father's letter buried beneath years of dust, the truth was far from what he expected. It wasn't a farewell or a confession, it was a message left in silence, a message that only deepened the mystery of his father's disappearance. Liam's father, Daniel, disappeared when Liam was just 12. House had been quiet ever since, with only the faint echo of his mother's grief and the weight of unanswered questions filling the halls. Now, years later, Liam returns to the family home after his mother's death, hoping to finally find closure. But instead of peace, he stumbles upon a letter his father had left behind, one that suggests Daniel never truly left. The discovery forces Liam to confront the shadows of his past, and what follows will challenge everything he thought he knew about his family and the man he had lost. The house was silent when I walked in, the kind of silence that presses down on your chest. I felt the weight of it in the air, like it had been holding its breath all these years. The floor creaked under my boots, as if the house remembered every step I'd taken as a child. I set my bag down on the kitchen table, and the faint smell of old wood and dust filled my nose. Everything was still here, but nothing was the same. I wasn't sure what I'd been expecting. I hadn't been back since she passed. The walls, the windows, they all felt like they were holding on to something. Maybe it was waiting for me. I'd spent a lot of years avoiding this place. It wasn't that I wanted to forget. It's just that the house was always louder in my memory than it ever was in real life. When I was a kid, I swore the walls would whisper when nobody was around. I never believed in ghosts, but I didn't need to. The house was the ghost. I stood in the kitchen, the wooden table where my mother used to sit for hours, staring out the window into the yard. She'd never really seen the world outside, always lost in something, maybe the past, maybe something she never said. I knew she kept things hidden, family secrets maybe, or maybe it was just the weight of time. I wasn't here to make peace with her. She was gone. I was here for answers, for the things my father never told me before he disappeared. It had been years since he walked out, 20. And still, the house felt like it was holding on to him, holding on to his absence. It wasn't just her death that kept me away. It was the hole he'd left behind, the one she refused to fill with anything but silence. I went up the stairs to the old room where I'd grown up. It looked like it hadn't been touched in ages. Dust had settled like a second skin, the air stale with forgotten moments. The floorboards creaked under my feet, and I stopped for a second. Something tugged at the back of my mind. I bent down, moved aside the old rug where I used to play. And there, beneath the floorboards, was something that didn't belong. I didn't know what I expected to find when I pried open the boards. Maybe nothing. Maybe just another reminder that nothing was ever truly here. But there it was, a folded piece of yellowed paper tucked neatly beneath the floor. The paper felt heavier than it should have, like it had been waiting there, like it had been watching. I picked it up carefully. The handwriting was unmistakable, my father's. I could see the way his words slanted, the way he had written with care, as though each letter mattered. I hadn't seen his handwriting in years, not since I was 12, not since he'd just left. My fingers trembled as I opened it, the edges fragile, as if it might fall apart in my hands. And there, in the soft, looping letters, were the words that stopped my heart. I never left, I was just hiding. Gah! I stared at it, the words swimming before my eyes, too big to understand. They didn't make sense. I folded the letter back up, holding it like a fragile thing. I tried to push it away. Tried to remind myself that it didn't matter, that my father had been gone a long time. But those words clung to me like a second skin. What was he hiding from? And why had he never told me? He left me with nothing but silence. I never thought I'd hear his voice again, but now his handwriting was there in front of me, and it felt like he was still trying to tell me something. I closed my eyes and let the weight of it settle in my chest. It wasn't just a letter. It was a puzzle, and I wasn't sure I was ready to solve it. I put the letter down on the dresser and stepped back. The room was quiet, too quiet. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the wind rustling outside, but the silence between the walls. It felt heavy now. I didn't know what to do with it. The letter, the words, my father's absence. And the house felt different. Every creak, every shift in the floor felt like it was waiting for me to do something, waiting for me to finally ask the questions I'd avoided for so long. I paced around the room, running my fingers along the old furniture, the photos on the wall that never quite felt like home. It all felt too distant, too cold. It was as though he'd left something behind, something I hadn't seen until now. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands, and thought about the years he'd been gone. The years I'd spent wondering why he left, why he never came back. some purses. And now I had this letter and I had no idea what it meant. And I wanted to tear it up, throw it away, pretend it didn't matter, but I couldn't. Yeah, I couldn't ignore the pull of it, the way his words haunted me even now. I was just hiding. It didn't make sense. Hiding from what? I remembered the nights I lay awake, waiting for him to come home, even after so many years. I'd never given up on the idea that he would walk through that door, that he'd come back and explain everything, but he never did. Okay, now the letter was all I had, and it only made me feel further from him than ever before. What was he hiding from? I folded the letter again, my fingers numb. The answer felt like it was just out of reach, but there was no going back. I had to know. And I wasn't sure if that was a blessing or a curse. Okay, I stood in the quiet of the room, the letter still in my hand, and looked out the window. The sun was setting, the light spilling over the yard like a memory. I hadn't realized how long I'd been standing there until the light began to fade. The house felt different now. The silence wasn't the same. It wasn't peaceful. Yunkankan. I stepped out of the room and shut the door softly behind me. The house was waiting, but so was I. And I had to find out. I couldn't leave it like this. Maybe the letter was just the beginning. Or maybe it was a warning. Either way, I had no choice but to follow it. But I wasn't sure if I was ready for what I might find. The darkness outside pressed against the window, and I wondered just how far I would have to go to uncover the truth. Would it set me free, or would it change everything I thought I knew? I wasn't sure. But the house, the letter, they had already told me one thing, the past was never as simple as it seemed, and I was about to learn that for myself. The pages of the album turned slowly under my fingers, each one a breath, each picture a memory. The light from the window spilled across the pages like dust, turning the old photographs to gold. I stopped, my hand trembling just a little. One of the corners of the photo was bent, as if it had been pulled at once too many times. It was him, my father, but he wasn't smiling, not like he used to. His eyes were shadowed. The barn behind him stood tall, but I couldn't make out the details. Something about the photo made the room feel colder. The house was quiet, too quiet. The only sound was the occasional creak of the floor beneath me as I moved. It wasn't the kind of silence that brings peace. It was a silence that felt like it was waiting for something, waiting for me. I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by boxes of old photos, memories I had avoided for too long. My mother had kept everything. Every birthday, every holiday, every milestone was recorded in these albums. Each picture was a piece of something I didn't understand, something I couldn't remember. Kennel. I hadn't come here expecting to find anything, but now that I was sitting here, flipping through these photographs, it felt like they were talking to me. It had been 20 years since he left. And even though I had thought I'd moved on, there was a heaviness in me. The kind of heaviness you don't recognize until it starts pressing on your chest again. His absence wasn't a void I had ever truly understood. I thought I had. But seeing him in these pictures, I felt that empty space expand, like something was missing that I hadn't noticed before. The photo of him standing alone in front of that barn, it felt out of place. It didn't belong. Or maybe I didn't belong there with it. I picked up the photo carefully, running my finger over the edges of the frame. The paper was old and frayed in places. My father's face, though it looked like him, wasn't the man I remembered. The man in the picture was a stranger. I had seen 1,000 pictures of him, but this one felt different. His shoulders were tense, his hands at his sides like he was waiting. His face was serious, like he knew something I didn't. The barn behind him seemed to loom, large and ominous. The light from the sun had slipped behind a cloud. And in that moment, his expression became more. Something I couldn't place. Fear? Regret? It was hard to say. I turned the picture over, hoping for something. A date, a name, anything that would give me context. But there was nothing. Just the usual empty space where words should have been. I flipped through the next few pages, the edges of the photos curling, but none of them felt like this one, not like this moment frozen in time. I could feel my pulse picking up, my breath a little faster. I paused on the photo, my fingers tracing the barn in the background. There had to be something more to this. What was it about that barn? What did he know, and why did he never tell me? I closed the album, my hand shaking. My heart felt like it was trying to find its way back into my chest. Maybe I was looking for something that wasn't there. Or maybe, just maybe, I was finding exactly what I needed to understand why he left. I stood up, the album still open on the table, and walked to the window. The light was fading, casting long shadows across the yard. The trees in the distance looked like they had been here forever. But it wasn't the trees that caught my attention, it was the barn. I had never noticed it before. I had never paid attention to it when I was growing up. It had always been there, tucked behind the house, just like the memories I had buried so deep inside me. And Ken, now looking at it, I felt a knot in my stomach. I hadn't come here to dig up old ghosts. I hadn't come here to find answers to questions I hadn't even known I had. But there was something about that barn, something about my father standing there in the shadow of it looking back at me, looking back at a time I had never known. Ken, I grabbed my jacket and walked toward the door. I had to see it. Ken, I had to know what was hidden there, what my father had been hiding. Maybe, just maybe, it would make sense. Ken, the night air was cool, the stars faint above, but the barn loomed in front of me like a quiet promise. I stood at the edge of the yard, looking at it, the way the roof sloped, and the way the windows seemed to peer back at me, dark and empty. And I hadn't noticed it before, not really, but now it felt like it was the only thing that mattered. I took a few steps toward it, my boots crunching the gravel beneath me, the house standing still behind me like it had been waiting all along. I reached for the barn door, and as I pulled it open, a gust of cold air hit my face. The silence pressed in again, but this time it didn't feel empty. It felt full. There was something inside. I didn't know what yet, but I was going to find it. Whatever it was, I had to know. Okay. As the door creaked open wider, I paused. The shadows inside were deep, hiding everything from view. But something was waiting there, and I was about to find it. Hunka. The wind blew through the trees, the branches scratching against the windows like an old memory. I stood at the edge of the yard, looking at the barn. It had always been there, hidden behind the thicket of vines and overgrown grass. It was hard to remember a time when I didn't know it was there. But in that moment, it felt like I had never really seen it before. The barn creaked in the wind, its wooden walls sagging under years of neglect. I wasn't sure why I was drawn to it now. Maybe it was the photo, maybe it was the letter, or maybe I was just tired of pretending I didn't care. And the air felt heavier as I walked toward the barn, each step slow, deliberate, like I was waiting for something to happen. The house behind me seemed distant now, a place full of echoes. It had been months since I had been here, since my mother passed, but today, standing in the yard, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been waiting for me all this time. The barn, hidden away like it was keeping secrets, felt like the place where everything began, the place where my father's absence had taken root. I had spent years trying to forget, trying to bury the past, but now, standing here, it felt like I couldn't escape it. The door groaned as I pushed it open, the smell of old wood and mildew immediately hitting me. It was darker inside than I had expected, shadows clinging to the corners like forgotten things. I had to step carefully on the floor, avoiding the places where the wood had rotted. The barn was more fragile than I remembered, but I wasn't here to admire the decay. There was something inside, something I hadn't seen before. A chest tucked away in the corner as if it had been waiting for me. I paused before the chest, my heart picking up. I wasn't sure why I felt so uneasy. It wasn't like I hadn't been through every inch of this place before, but something about this moment felt different. The chest was small, unremarkable at first glance, but the dust on it told a different story. It hadn't been touched in years. I knelt down, my fingers brushing over the rough surface. The lock was old, rusted, but it gave way with a soft click. The air around me seemed to hold its breath as I lifted the lid. Inside there were more letters, piled high and tucked into yellowed envelopes. They were all written in my father's hand, but these weren't for me. I could tell before I even opened the first one. The handwriting was familiar, but these words weren't meant for me. I opened one carefully, my fingers trembling just a little. The paper was thick, almost too thick to bend. I read the first few lines, the weight of them pressing down on me. The letters were full of names I didn't recognize, places I had never heard of. They spoke of debts, of people who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. And there were hints of something even darker. My father had been involved in something dangerous. Something that wasn't just about money. I didn't know what to do with that information. I wanted to throw the letters back in the chest, shut it, and leave. But I couldn't. I read more, my eyes scanning the paper as though they could find something to make sense of it. But it didn't. It just raised more questions. What was my father mixed up in? And why had he never told me about it? I closed the chest slowly, the weight of the letters still in my hands. I stood up and took a step back, my heart racing in my chest. The barn felt colder now. The shadows seemed to be moving in the corners, whispering secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to know. I ran my hand over the chest, feeling the rough wood beneath my fingers. I had never seen it before. Never thought to look for it, but it was here, hidden away, just like everything else my father had left behind. And I walked toward the back of the barn, my feet dragging through the dirt. The silence pressed down on me, thick and heavy, like it was waiting for me to say something, do something. but I didn't know what. I was still standing there, lost in the shadows of the barn when the weight of it hit me. My father hadn't just disappeared, he had run, he had hidden, and now all these years later, I was standing in the place where it had all started. Why hadn't he ever told me? The wind howled outside, making the barn creak again, but this time it didn't feel like an old house settling. It felt like something else, something that had been buried for too long. I needed to know what he had been hiding, what had he been running from. But as I stood there, staring at the chest, I wasn't sure if I was ready to find out. The air in the barn grew colder as the evening stretched on. I couldn't stay much longer. The weight of the letters, the questions they raised, was enough to make the room feel suffocating. I turned toward the door, but before I stepped outside, I glanced back one last time. The barn, with its sagging roof and overgrown vines, looked just the same as it had when I was a boy. But now it felt different. It was no longer a place I had ignored. It was a place full of things I hadn't known about my father, things I wasn't sure I was ready to learn to Semshri, things I wasn't sure I was ready to learn. I stepped outside, the cool air brushing against my skin, but the questions still clung to me like the dust in the barn. What had he hidden here? What had he been trying to protect me from? I didn't know, but I was starting to understand that maybe, just maybe, the answers weren't going to come easily. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for the truth. The house had always been quiet, but tonight it was different. It wasn't the kind of quiet that brought peace. It was the kind of quiet that fills the room with weight. The floorboards creaked underfoot, as if each step I took was a secret the house had been holding onto for years. I sat in the kitchen, the dim light from the old lamp casting long shadows on the walls. I hadn't realized how late it was until the silence grew so thick it pressed against me, like the house was watching, waiting. I had been here for days now, going through drawers, sorting through memories, my father's things mostly. But the longer I stayed, the more I felt like something was wrong. Not with the house itself, no, the house was just old, just quiet. But with me. It wasn't just the creaks of the floor that unsettled me. It wasn't the way the air seemed to grow heavier as the evening wore on. It was something else, something deeper. I could feel it, something watching. At first I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. After all, I was digging through a life I'd never fully understood, a life full of secrets and silences. But the longer I stayed in this house, the more it felt like it wasn't just memories that lingered here. It felt like I wasn't alone. Not really. And the old clock on the wall ticked steadily, its rhythm so familiar, but it didn't bring comfort. It felt like a countdown to something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. I glanced around the room, the walls closing in a little tighter. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was something else. Something that made me doubt everything I thought I knew about my father, about this place, about myself. Maybe it was just the weight of the house, the old wood that had soaked in years of memories. Or maybe it was more than that. I stood up from the kitchen table and walked down the hallway, the wooden floors creaking beneath my weight. The air felt cooler now, the kind of chill that comes not from the temperature but from the silence. I stopped in front of my father's old room. The door was slightly ajar, as it had been since I first arrived. I didn't need to go in. I had already gone through the drawers, the papers, the photos, but something made me pause. I pushed the door open just enough to slip inside. The room was just as I remembered it. The same old bed, the same desk pushed against the wall. But there was something different about it now, something that made it feel even emptier. I walked over to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see the yard outside. The shadows in the yard stretched long, the trees moving slightly in the wind. It was so still, too still. And then I heard it, footsteps faint, barely audible. They were soft, almost too soft to be real. I froze, my hand still on the curtain. The sound stopped, then started again, coming closer. My breath caught in my throat. I stepped back from the window, listening harder. But the footsteps stopped just outside the door. I waited, nothing. The hallway was empty, the silence pressing in around me again, heavier than before. I stepped into the hallway, looking both ways. Nothing, no one. I told myself it was nothing. Just the house settling, just the wind. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't the only one in this house. The night stretched on, but I couldn't bring myself to sleep. The silence had wrapped itself around me, and every creak, every groan of the house only made it worse. I lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, trying to calm my mind. And I couldn't stop thinking about my father, about what I had found, about the things he had hidden, the things he had left unsaid. Had he known something I didn't? Was that why he left? The thought lingered in my mind like a shadow, stretching out across the room. But then, as I lay there, something else occurred to me. Maybe he hadn't just left, and maybe he had been trying to protect me. I turned over, pulling the blanket tighter around my shoulders. I couldn't be sure. I couldn't be sure. There was so much I couldn't be sure. There was so much I didn't know, so much I couldn't understand. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like my father's disappearance wasn't just a choice. It felt like it had been forced on him, and now here I was, alone in this house, in this place that had held so many secrets. Had he hidden from something, from someone? The footsteps earlier echoed in my mind, the way they seemed to come from nowhere, then disappear into nothing. I couldn't explain it, but the unease in me had grown. I wasn't sure if I was being paranoid or if there was something here. Something that had been waiting for me to ask the right questions. I got out of bed, the floor cool beneath my feet as I moved quietly through the house. The hallway seemed longer now, the shadows creeping along the walls like old ghosts. I stopped at the stairs, looking up into the darkened second floor. The house seemed to breathe around me. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe it was just comfort, or maybe I was hoping to find something that would make sense of all the fear, all the doubt that had been creeping into my thoughts. But as I stood there in the dark, I knew I wasn't going to find any answers tonight. The silence in the house was thick, like it was waiting for me to speak, to ask the questions that had been haunting me. I turned back toward the stairs, the wood creaking under my weight. Maybe tomorrow I'd have the courage to face it, but for now, I just needed to sleep. And in the dark, I could almost hear my father's voice again, faint but clear. I never left, I was just hiding. The words followed me as I climbed back into bed, the quiet of the house wrapping around me like a blanket. I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come. The night stretched on, and the silence felt heavier than ever. The morning light was soft, filtering through the kitchen window like it was holding something back. I sat at the table, the map spread out in front of me. Its edges were torn, worn from years of being folded and unfolded. The ink had faded in places, but I could still make out the symbols. Odd, strange, like something I wasn't supposed to understand. The circle in red caught my eye. It was near the edge of the woods. I wasn't sure why, but I felt like I had to go there. Like the map had been waiting for me to find it. I hadn't expected to find anything like this. I thought I was done with searching, done with the past. But the moment I saw the map, something shifted. The house was quieter than usual. The kind of silence that wraps itself around you and makes you feel like there's something underneath it, a presence, question waiting to be answered. I ran my fingers over the map, feeling the rough texture of the paper. It was so simple, yet so full of meaning. A place I didn't recognize, but something about it felt familiar. Almost too familiar. It wasn't just the map itself. It was the way it felt like my father had been here, had walked these same paths. The circled spot, it wasn't far, just a few miles into the woods. But why had my father marked it? What did it mean? I couldn't shake the feeling that the answer was just beyond my reach. But I wasn't sure if I was ready to find out. But I had to go. So I packed my jacket and left the house, stepping out into the crisp morning air. The sun was still low, casting long shadows on the ground. It felt like everything had paused for just a moment, like the world was waiting. The road leading out of the house was familiar, but somehow different now. The trees seemed to crowd in a little closer, their branches reaching out like fingers. The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying a scent I couldn't place. I walked toward the woods, the path winding through the trees. It felt like something was guiding me, pulling me in that direction, though I didn't know why. With every step, the feeling grew stronger. I had been here before. I could almost remember it, the feeling of the ground beneath my feet, the rustling of the trees above, the way the air felt. But I couldn't place it. I couldn't place it. The map kept running through my mind, the circled spot. Why had he marked it? What was it about this place? As I got closer to the edge of the woods, my heart began to race. The world around me felt both familiar and foreign, like I was walking into a memory I couldn't quite remember. The trees seemed to open up a little, and I saw it, a small clearing, the ground soft and uneven. There was nothing special about it, at least not on the surface. But something about it stopped me in my tracks. I hadn't realized how fast I had been walking until I stopped. The silence here was different, deeper. The air felt heavier, like it was holding something inside. I stepped forward, my boots sinking slightly into the earth. I glanced around, my eyes scanning the area. There was nothing here. But the longer I stood, the more it felt like I was standing on the edge of something, a memory, a truth that had been buried. I kneeled down, brushing my fingers against the earth. It was cold, damp. It had rained recently. The map hadn't told me what to expect. But now that I was here, standing in this place, I felt it, a tug at the back of my mind, like I had been here before. I didn't know how or when, but the feeling was there. The same feeling I'd had when I first stepped into the house, like I was walking into a part of my past I didn't remember. And then I saw a faint mark in the ground just to the side of the clearing. Das and Avertricia not a rind. I fruffer ten somebody I knelt down again. It was subtle, barely noticeable. But it was there. I knelt down again, brushing the dirt away, my fingers trembling. Slowly, the shape became clearer. It was a faded outline, like something had been buried here. Something that had been left behind, forgotten. I pulled at the earth, moving it aside, revealing a small object half buried in the dirt. A box, old and rusted. My heart skipped a beat. I reached for it, pulling it out of the ground carefully. It felt heavier than I expected. I didn't know what I was expecting to find. But the moment I held it in my hands, I knew this was it. This was what I had been searching for. The box was covered in dirt, the metal edges worn from years of neglect. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should open it, but then I couldn't stop myself. I pried the lid open, the rust creaking under my fingers. Old documents, yellowed and fragile, like they had been sitting here for decades. I pulled one of them out, my hands shaking. It was a letter. The handwriting was familiar, my father's. I started reading, but the words didn't make sense. They were written in a hurry, frantic. My father had been writing to someone, talking about things I didn't understand, places I didn't know, names I didn't recognize, and then there it was. A mention of the woods, of something dangerous that had happened here. The letter ended abruptly, the words trailing off. It didn't make sense, none of it did. I looked around the clearing, my heart racing. This was more than just a forgotten place. This was a part of my father's past. A past that had been buried, hidden from me. I stood up, the box still in my hands, my mind spinning. The air felt thick now, like the trees themselves were watching me. I looked down at the papers again, but the words blurred before my eyes. I didn't know what to do with this, I didn't know what it meant, but I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't done yet. I had found something, but it wasn't the end. There was more to this place, to the map, to my father's past, and I was going to find out what it all meant, no matter where it led me. But for now, all I could do was stand there, holding the box in my hands, feeling like I was standing at the edge of something I couldn't quite grasp. The woods were silent, save for the faint rustle of the leaves. The air felt thick, like it had been holding its breath. I walked carefully, each step sinking into the soft earth, trying not to make a sound. Ahead through the trees I saw it, a house, abandoned and worn, its walls sagging beneath years of neglect. It wasn't much more than a shadow now, hidden away by the woods, as though it had been forgotten. I stepped closer, the smell of damp wood and decay creeping up on me. I hadn't come here for this, but now, standing before it, I knew I had to go inside. The house looked as though it had been left in a hurry. The windows were boarded up, some with gaps that let in the dim light. The front door hung open, barely clinging to its hinges. I hesitated for a moment, standing on the threshold, as though waiting for someone to stop me. But the house stayed silent. My father's life was full of secrets, things he'd never told me. I'd spent weeks trying to piece together the fragments of his past, and yet here I was, standing in front of a place that seemed to hold the answers I had been looking for. I felt a strange pull in my chest, a mix of fear and curiosity. What had he been hiding? Why had he never mentioned this place, this house? I took a deep breath and stepped over the threshold. The floor creaked beneath me, the wood groaning with age. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was intruding on something. Something that had been left undisturbed for far too long. I looked around, the dim light filtering through the cracks in the walls. The air was thick with dust, the remnants of a life once lived scattered across the room. Old furniture, books, and photos piled up in corners, all covered in a layer of dirt and neglect. I could hear my own breath, the only sound in the house. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew I had to find it. I moved further into the house, my footsteps soft on the floor, the dust rising in little clouds around me. Each room I passed was a snapshot of a life that had been abandoned. There were photographs scattered across a table, faces I didn't recognize. A woman, a man, children, none of them looked familiar, but something in their eyes made me pause. And I picked up a photo frame, the glass cracked but still intact. The woman in the photo looked young, smiling, with a softness in her eyes that I couldn't quite place. And then I saw it, the journal. It was tucked away under a pile of old books, its leather cover cracked and worn. I picked it up carefully, the weight of it surprising. I opened it, the pages brittle, yellowed with age. The first entry was dated years before my father disappeared. The handwriting was unmistakable, his slanted script filling the pages. As I read, I felt a cold chill run through me. My father's words were filled with secrets, things he had never shared, struggles he had hidden from everyone. The journal spoke of fears, of people chasing him, of debts that couldn't be repaid. Cake, the life he had been living was nothing like the one I had known. It was filled with lies hidden behind walls he had built, walls I had never seen. Yeah, I turned the pages, each one revealing a little more of the truth. A truth I wasn't ready to hear. I had thought I knew my father, but these words, they told me a different story. Why had he kept this from me? Why had he hidden this part of himself? The more I read, the more it became clear. My father had been running from something far worse than I had imagined. I sat down on the floor, the journal still in my hands, the words swimming before my eyes. Kent, my father's world was a lie. Everything he had told me, everything I had believed, was nothing more than a mask. Again, I thought back to the days when he was still here, when he was just Dad. The man who could fix anything, who always knew what to say, the man who had disappeared without a word. What had he been hiding from? The journal didn't offer any easy answers, it only raised more questions. As I turned the pages, I came to a section that was different from the rest. The writing became more frantic, the words spilling out as if there was no time left. He spoke of people looking for him, people who would stop at nothing to find him. He wrote about leaving, about disappearing, but not for the reasons I had always thought. He hadn't left because he wanted to, he had left because he had no choice. The man I had known, the man I had called my father, wasn't the man I thought he was. And the man who had written these words, he was someone else entirely. I closed the journal slowly, my heart heavy in my chest. I didn't know what to do with it, didn't know what to do with any of this. But one thing was clear. My father had kept a part of himself hidden from me, a part I had never known, a part I had never asked about. I had found a life I didn't know existed, and it was too much to understand all at once. I sat there for a long time, the journal resting on my lap, the room around me still and quiet. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of the truth I had uncovered. I stood up, walking to the window, the view of the trees outside seeming so distant, so far away. David Henkenching sane. The house felt colder now, the shadows longer. And I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do with this new knowledge. What was I supposed to do with the man I had just discovered? But I knew I couldn't stay here forever. The secrets this house held, the secrets my father had buried, couldn't stay hidden for much longer. I turned and walked toward the door, the journal still in my hands. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew one thing for sure. The past had a way of catching up with you, and I was just beginning to understand how deep the lies went. The doorbell rang, sharp and sudden, breaking the silence of the house. I hadn't been expecting anyone. I looked out the window, my breath fogging the glass for a moment before I saw him, a man standing in the driveway, his shoulders hunched against the cold. His coat was old, the kind that's been worn through too many winters. He was waiting like he knew I would come. The wind blew his coat back, and for a second I thought I saw something in his eyes, a weight, something heavy I couldn't place. I opened the door before I could think too much about it. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, his dark eyes locked on mine like he was measuring something. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. There was something about him that unsettled me, but I couldn't say why. He cleared his throat after a moment, his voice rough, like he hadn't spoken in years. "Liam," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. "You're Daniel's boy, aren't you?" I nodded, unsure of what else to do. He didn't wait for me to say anything else. "I knew your father," he continued, his voice low. "I've known him for a long time. I wasn't sure what to think. I hadn't recognized him. I didn't know his face, and I certainly didn't know his name. But there was something in the way he spoke, like he was carrying a burden that wasn't his to bear. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. He paused, then took a step forward, his boots crunching the gravel. "It's not what I want, Liam. It's what your father wanted." The words hung in the air, heavy and thick. "I need to talk to you," he added, the faintest tremor in his voice. I stepped aside, barely enough room for him to pass. The door creaked as it closed behind him, the weight of the silence between us growing. He didn't sit down, didn't even look around the house. His eyes were fixed on me like he was waiting for something, an answer, a reaction. I motioned toward the kitchen. "Header on her tonder coffin take. Do you want some coffee?" He shook his head. "I'm not here for coffee." I didn't know what to say. I felt the tension rise in my chest. I had uncovered so much. The past few weeks had been a blur of letters, discoveries, and unanswered questions. But now this man, this stranger was here, and everything felt like it was shifting beneath me. "I don't understand," I said, my voice unsteady. "Who are you?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a deep breath, as though gathering the strength to say something he hadn't wanted to. Daniel didn't disappear on his own, he said finally, his voice steady but filled with something I couldn't name. He didn't leave because he wanted to. I stared at him, my breath catching in my throat. What are you talking about? The stranger met my eyes, his expression darkening. Your father was forced to leave. He had no choice. Kya. I felt the ground shift under my feet, the air in the room suddenly too thick to breathe. My mind raced, my pulse quickened. Why? Why would he leave? And why are you here? His face was drawn, his eyes clouded with something ancient, something I couldn't read because, Liam, I'm part of the reason your father's gone. I felt a chill run through me like a gust of wind had blown through the room. The man's words hit me harder than I expected. You're what? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I didn't want to be, he said, his voice cracking, but I was… He rubbed his face with a hand that trembled slightly like he was trying to erase something he couldn't. I worked with your father, we were involved in something dangerous. And when the people who were after him found out, they made sure he had no choice but to disappear. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. What kind of danger? He shook his head. I can't tell you everything. I wish I could, but some things you're better off not knowing. My thoughts were spinning, tangled in questions I couldn't sort out. You were involved in whatever happened to my father? The man nodded slowly, his face hardening. Yes, I was involved, but I didn't have a choice. Neither did he. We were running from people who would have hurt you, hurt your mother, hurt everyone you loved. Gang, I stepped back, my heart pounding. So he left to protect us? The man didn't answer right away. He stared at the floor for a moment, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. He left to protect you. He thought it would be safer that way. But it wasn't just about you. There were people looking for both of us, people who weren't going to stop. I didn't know how to process the weight of his words. I could feel the tears rising, but I didn't let them fall. Not yet, not until I understood more. I don't believe you, I said, more to myself than to him. This doesn't make sense. If he was trying to protect me, why didn't he come back? Why didn't he tell me? The man's eyes softened for the first time, as though the weight of his confession had finally broken through. I wish I could answer that, but some things were out of his hands. He was trying to protect you, but he couldn't protect himself. The stranger stood there in the doorway, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The room was quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your chest. I didn't know if I believed him. I didn't know if I wanted to believe him. But the more he spoke, the more the pieces of the past began to shift into something unrecognizable. What now? I asked, my voice hoarse. He hesitated before answering. Now you decide if you want to know the rest of the story, because the truth is buried deeper than you think, and it's not just about your father. It's about you, too. I stood there, the weight of his words pressing down on me. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do with any of this, but I knew one thing. I couldn't walk away from it. The stranger turned and walked out of the door without another word, leaving me standing in the quiet house. The door clicked shut behind him, and for a moment I just stood there, listening to the silence. But I wasn't sure I could stay silent for much longer. The house was still, too still. The only sound was the ticking of the old clock in the hallway. Each tick felt like a breath, waiting for something to happen. I couldn't sleep. The stranger's words, they kept echoing in my head. Your father's disappearance wasn't voluntary. I stood by the window, looking out at the darkened yard, where the shadows of the trees stretched across the ground like they were reaching for something. I had to know, I had to understand. I pulled on my jacket and stepped outside, the cold air biting at my skin. The house behind me felt like it was holding its breath too, waiting for me to go further, to ask the questions I couldn't let go of. The night felt heavier than it should have, the darkness swallowing everything in its path. The gravel beneath my boots crunched with each step, but the sound felt distant. My mind was elsewhere. I didn't know who the stranger was, didn't know what he knew or why he had come, but his words had planted something in me, a question that wouldn't go away. Your father was forced to leave. I had spent so many years thinking my father's disappearance was a choice, his choice. He had left us, walked away from his family for reasons I couldn't understand. But the stranger, he said my father hadn't left, he had been forced. The night pressed against me and I could feel the weight of it like it was trying to crush me. I didn't want to confront him, didn't want to hear more of his cryptic words, but something in me urged me forward, a need to know, even if I wasn't sure I could handle it. The porch light flickered as I stepped up to the door, my hand hesitating on the knob. I took a deep breath and opened it. He was there, waiting just like I knew he would be. The man was sitting in the same chair he had been in earlier, his dark eyes watching me closely. Hey, I didn't sit. I stood in the doorway, my hand still gripping the handle. The house felt too small, too confining with him in it. I need to know what you meant, I said, my voice steady, though I could feel the tension in every word. K. He didn't answer right away, his eyes studying me like he was deciding whether or not to speak. I told you, he said slowly, his voice heavy with something that felt like regret. Your father wasn't running because he wanted to. He didn't leave on his own terms. I took a step forward, my heart beating faster. Then why? What was he running from? The man's hands were folded in his lap, his weathered fingers tapping lightly on the chair. He didn't look at me, his gaze fixed somewhere in the distance. Ken, I don't know if I can tell you everything, but I can tell you this. Your father was involved in something dangerous, something that changed his life. And when those people came after him, he had no choice but to disappear. My chest tightened, I swallowed hard. What was it? What was he involved in? The man sighed, his breath a long, weary sound. It's not something you can understand, Liam. It's not something you should know. But I have to know, I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. My whole life, I've been living with this lie. My father left me without a word. He never said why, and now you're telling me it wasn't his choice? Kang, the man finally looked at me, his eyes dark and full of a weight I could barely comprehend. You're right. He didn't tell you, and I'm not sure I can either. But I'll tell you this much, his world was full of things he couldn't escape. And those things followed him, they followed all of us. I didn't understand, I couldn't, but the heaviness of his words sank into me, and I felt like I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't see but could feel pulling me in. I took a deep breath, stepping closer. What happened to him? Why didn't he ever come back? Ken, the man's eyes darkened. He was trying to protect you, all of you. But it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about keeping you safe, keeping your mother safe, keeping everyone safe. His voice broke slightly, as if he too was remembering something too painful to say aloud. Kenken, I was standing at the edge of a truth I wasn't ready to hear, and yet I couldn't look away. Okay, the man stood up then, his hands shaking slightly as he wiped his face. Your father, he never wanted this for you. He wanted to protect you from the world he had to live in. Ken, I could see the pain in his face now, raw and unguarded. This wasn't just a stranger to me. He was someone who had known my father, someone who had shared the burden of whatever this dark secret was. Who were they? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Who was he hiding from? The man hesitated, his eyes flickering to the window, as though he was looking for something in the dark beyond the glass. They were people from his past, people who couldn't let him go. They found him, Liam, and when they did, it was too late. He had no choice but to disappear. Perganen, I felt like the floor was dropping out besme other beseminis menensev and dinen consakana. I felt like the floor was dropping out beneath me, the weight of his words sinking into my chest. Wecken tekken tankum. So he left to save us? The man nodded slowly, his expression somber, yes. But not just from them, from the things that had already happened. Your father's world. It was never safe. And he couldn't bear the thought of bringing it to you. Okay, the truth was like a weight in my hands, but I wasn't sure how to hold it. I wanted to believe him, wanted to trust his words, but something about it didn't sit right. How do I know you're telling the truth? I asked, the doubt slipping into my voice before I could stop it. The man's shoulders slumped, and for the first time I saw the years catch up with him. You don't, Liam, but I'm not the one who lied. Your father did, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry you had to find out like this. The room was quiet again, the silence pressing in around us. I didn't know what to do with the truth I had just heard, upon Shavend, or if it was even the truth at all. Keon, I stepped back toward the door, my mind spinning. I need time, I said, my voice rough. And the man didn't stop me, didn't try to say anything else. He just nodded, his dark eyes following me as I walked out. The night had grown colder, the wind carrying a chill that seemed to seep into my bones. And I stepped outside, letting the door close softly behind me. The stars were faint above, the air thick with unanswered questions. Again, I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing. The past had a way of catching up with you. And it was waiting for me. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. The smell of dust filled the air, thick and familiar. I sat at the table, the chest in front of me, still open, the letters scattered across the surface like pieces of a puzzle I didn't know how to solve. I had thought I was finished, that I understood the story, but as I reached for the last letter, the one tucked beneath everything else, Tengri, I felt the weight of it before I even touched it. I opened it slowly. The paper was old, brittle at the edges, but the words still jumped out at me like they were fresh. I had been through all of this before, the letters, the photos, the journal. I thought I had pieced together my father's story. He had left, and I had spent so many years convincing myself that it was because of something he had wanted, something he had chosen, but now, the more I read, the more I began to understand that I had been wrong. So much of it had been lies, or at least half-truths. My father had been running. Not from us, but from something much bigger, much darker. Cal. I sat there, the letter trembling in my hands, feeling the weight of what I was learning, and yet part of me wanted to close it, put it away, and never look again. But I couldn't. The truth was too close now, too important. It wasn't just about my father anymore. It was about me, about everything he had kept hidden, about why he had disappeared and why he had left without ever saying goodbye. The letter in my hands was the last piece, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. But I had to know, I had to understand the truth, even if it broke me. I unfolded the letter carefully, as though it might crumble in my hands. The ink was dark, but the edges had begun to fade, like time had already begun erasing my father's words. The letter began simply enough, a familiar tone, as if he were speaking to me. But the further I read, the more the words unsettled me. He spoke of debts that had started small but had grown, slowly at first, then faster and faster until they consumed him. People who were not kind, people who wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. I read the words over and over, the reality of it sinking deeper. My father had been forced into hiding. It wasn't just his past catching up to him, it was a fight for survival. He hadn't left us because he wanted to. He had disappeared to protect us from the danger he had brought into our lives. And the more I read, the more I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. I had believed in so many things about my father, that he had walked away, that he had chosen to leave me. But this wasn't a choice. He had no choice. My father had been trying to keep us safe, to keep me and my mother safe, from something I couldn't even begin to understand. And yet in the process, he had left me with a hole that had never healed. I ran my fingers over the paper, feeling the weight of his words in the quiet of the house. He spoke of things I couldn't grasp, names I didn't recognize, but I could hear his voice in my mind as I read, his tired, desperate voice, trying to explain a choice I could never have understood. The words blurred in front of me as I tried to process them. The pain, the weight of it was overwhelming. He had done this to protect us, to keep us safe. But in doing so, he had kept everything from me, the truth, the danger, the choice he had made. I felt my chest tighten, the familiar ache of years of unanswered questions pressing in on me. What was I supposed to feel? Anger? Hurt? Confusion? I had spent years thinking my father had left because of me, that he had chosen to walk away from his family, from everything he had built. But now I was learning that it wasn't about me at all, it was about survival. The letter was filled with apologies, with regrets that would never be voiced aloud. He never wanted to hurt me, but in the end, his actions had hurt me in ways he never could have imagined. I set the letter down on the table, my hands shaking slightly. The quiet of the house pressed against me, the air thick with the weight of what I had learned. I wasn't sure what to do with it, with all of it. The truth felt like a burden I wasn't ready to carry, but it was mine now. My father's choices were mine to understand, to accept, or to carry with me forever. I stood up slowly, the letter still on the table, my father's words hanging in the air between us. The house felt different now, quieter, as though it too was holding its breath, waiting for me to make sense of everything. Calm. I stepped to the window and looked out at the yard. The trees were still, their shadows long in the fading light of the day. I had spent so many years living with the ghost of my father's disappearance. I had blamed him. I had cursed him for leaving. But now, with the truth in front of me, I felt something else, a hollow sadness. He had left not because he wanted to, but because he had no choice. I didn't know if I could forgive him for that. I didn't know if I could ever understand why he had kept this secret, why he had chosen to protect me by lying. But I knew one thing for sure, the past wasn't what I thought it was, and neither was my father. I turned away from the window, the weight of the truth still heavy in my chest. The house was silent again, but this time it felt like it was waiting for me to move forward. And for the first time I didn't know where that would lead. The rain fell in soft sheets, drumming against the roof like a memory I couldn't quite place. I sat by the window, watching it blur everything outside. The world outside was muffled, like it wasn't mine to touch. I should have been resting, trying to quiet my mind, but all I could hear were the words the stranger had left behind. Your father didn't leave because he wanted to. He left because he had to. The rain slowed, but the weight of it didn't. It pressed against me. I felt it deep in my bones. The past was waiting for me to make a choice, and I didn't know if I could face it, I had spent weeks picking apart the fragments of my father's life, digging through boxes of forgotten letters, old photographs, things I never knew existed. It had all felt like pieces of a puzzle I was trying to put together, but now the puzzle was finished, and it was bigger than I had ever imagined. I had learned the truth. My father's disappearance wasn't a choice. He hadn't left us willingly. He'd been forced to run to protect us. The stranger had given me the answers, but in return he had taken away something else. The truth was heavy. It felt like it was swallowing me whole. The house was quiet now, but the silence was deafening. I could feel the pressure of everything that had happened here, the years of lies, the secrets buried under the floorboards. I didn't know where to turn. Should I leave it all behind? Let it fade into the past, just like my father had? Or should I dig deeper, confront the people who had made him disappear? The choice seemed simple at first. But now, with the weight of it all pressing in on me, I wasn't so sure. I walked through the house slowly, my footsteps echoing in the silence. Each room seemed colder than the last, like they were all holding their breath, waiting for me to make a decision. I stopped in the living room, looking at the photo on the mantel. My mother, my father, both so young, so full of hope. Teen sick verse. The past felt so far away, like it belonged to someone else. I had always thought of my father as a man of strength, someone who had made choices, who had acted with purpose. But now I wasn't sure what I had known about him. Had he left because he had no choice? Or had he abandoned us for a reason I couldn't yet understand? I turned away from the photo and walked toward the window, watching the rain as it fell in endless sheets. The world outside was just as gray, just as heavy. The choice wasn't simple anymore. It wasn't just about understanding my father's choices. It was about understanding my own. Should I leave it all behind, or should I confront what lay buried in the past? The answers weren't as clear as I had hoped. The doorbell rang, soft at first, then louder, more insistent. I didn't know who it was. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. I opened the door to find the stranger standing there. His weathered face looking even more tired than before. I thought you might still be here, he said, his voice rough, like he hadn't used it in days. I stepped back, unsure what to say. I hadn't expected him to come back. He looked past me, his eyes scanning the house, the silence hanging between us. I came to give you a warning, he said quietly, his eyes meeting mine. The past doesn't stay buried forever. You can't hide from it, I frowned. I never planned to hide from it, he sighed, stepping inside, without waiting for me to invite him. The people your father was running from, they're still out there, and they're still looking for answers. You've got a choice to make, Liam. You can walk away from it all, let it die with your father. Or you can face it, and you might not like what you find. I stepped back, my heart racing. Why are you telling me this? His eyes softened, but there was a sadness in them I hadn't noticed before. Because it's not just about your father anymore, it's about you too. You've always been a part of this, even if you didn't know it. And, Kang, the words hit me like a blow to the chest. I hadn't wanted to be a part of it. I had spent so long trying to distance myself from my father's past, from his mistakes. But now I couldn't run from it anymore. What do I do now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The stranger didn't answer right away. He just looked at me, as though waiting for me to find the answer on my own. The stranger left without another word, disappearing into the night. The house felt even emptier now, like something had shifted, something I couldn't name. I stood at the door for a moment, staring out at the rain-soaked world. The choice was mine now. I could turn away the Stenpersation Ford Nation Center. I could turn away, leave it all behind, or I could walk into the storm and find out what had been buried for so long. But part of me wondered, if I didn't make a choice, would the past just swallow me whole? I looked back at the house, the memories of the past pressing in on me. The silence hung thick, but this time, it wasn't empty. It was full of questions, full of things I wasn't sure I was ready to face. I closed the door behind me, feeling the weight of it all, and then I walked out into the night. The road stretched before me, empty and quiet. The trees on either side seemed to lean in like they knew something I didn't. The wind was soft, rustling the leaves in a way that almost felt like a whisper. I stood there, one foot on the dirt, the other still on the porch. The house behind me seemed like it had always been there, but today it felt different. The air felt thicker, heavier, like it was holding its breath. I glanced back at the door, then at the gravel path winding into the distance. There were no more answers waiting for me here. The truth had been found, and yet it still lingered, heavy in my chest, like an anchor pulling me towards something I couldn't yet see. And I hadn't expected it to feel this way. The truth, the full weight of it, was heavy, but I thought I would feel some kind of relief. I thought that once the secrets were out, once I knew what had really happened, I could move on. But it wasn't that simple. The road before me seemed endless, like it had no beginning and no end. Just like the questions I had about my father, the answers hadn't been easy. They had torn apart everything I thought I knew, shattered the image of the man I had spent years hating, longing for, trying to understand. And I had learned that my father hadn't left because he wanted to. He had left to protect us, to keep us from the same danger that had followed him for so many years. But knowing the truth didn't fix the years of silence, the years of wondering why he'd left, why he'd never come back. I had been searching for something, but now that I had it, it felt more like a burden than a relief. I glanced down the road again, the path leading into the distance, and I realized I wasn't sure where I was supposed to go next. The house behind me was full of ghosts, full of a past I couldn't outrun. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't the past I needed to confront anymore. It was the future. I turned away from the house and began walking down the path, my boots crunching against the gravel. The rain had stopped, but the air still held a dampness, a coolness that settled on my skin. The weight of my father's choices lingered in the back of my mind. I had learned so much about him, about the life he had kept hidden from us, from me. I couldn't blame him, not anymore, but I couldn't forgive him either. The road ahead seemed clear, but my steps were slow, deliberate. I wasn't sure if I was walking towards something or just away from it all. I thought about the stranger's words, about my father's past, about the things he had kept from me. It all felt so heavy, like the world had shifted beneath me, and now I was trying to find my footing again. The house behind me, the place that had once been my home, felt like it was fading into the distance. But the memories, the truth I had uncovered, they weren't going anywhere. I could still feel the weight of it, the burden of the past, of things I had never asked about, never understood. But there was a strange sense of release too. The air felt a little lighter, a little easier to breathe. Maybe it was because the questions had finally been answered. Or maybe it was because, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for an answer anymore. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I couldn't stay here. I couldn't stay in the past. I had to move forward. I kept walking, my pace steady, my thoughts racing. The road wound through the woods, the trees stretching up like silent sentinels watching over me. The silence was deep, thick, but it wasn't as oppressive as it had been back at the house. I thought about my father's choices, about how he had kept everything hidden from me, from my mother. I wondered what kind of man he had been, the man I never knew, the man who had run from something so dangerous that he had to leave his family behind. And I wanted to understand him, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that maybe understanding wasn't the point anymore. Maybe forgiveness wasn't the point either. It wasn't about whether I could forgive him for leaving. It was about whether I could forgive myself for holding on to something that was never mine to carry. I had spent so many years believing in a story that wasn't true. My father hadn't left because he wanted to. He had left because he had no choice. But that wasn't the whole story either. I couldn't live in the shadow of his choices forever. I had my own path to find, my own decisions to make, and the road ahead, even though I couldn't see it clearly, was mine to walk. The sky was turning darker now, the first hints of twilight stretching across the horizon. The air felt cooler, but the weight in my chest had lifted just a little. I wasn't sure what would come next, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving towards something. The road stretched before me, empty and quiet, just like the life I had yet to live. The house was far behind me now, its shadows fading into the distance. But the truth I had uncovered would follow me. It would always be a part of me. Maybe it was time to stop running from it. I stopped walking for a moment, taking in the stillness around me. The trees, the wind, the quiet, this was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for, whether I was ready for it or not. I took a deep breath and started walking again, my steps steady, my path uncertain, but I wasn't afraid anymore. The past was behind me, and the road ahead, even though I couldn't see where it would take me, was mine to choose.